Defenders. Today, let's start with a quote of the day from Ukraine's Ministry of Defense. Do not try to make circumstances fit your plans. Make plans that fit the circumstances. General Patton. This week might be eventful. Erdogan says efforts to end Ukraine war at a turning point. It might be at a turning point, but not for the reasons that people are publicly saying. What is this entire week about? And this entire week is basically about cornering Donald Trump to force him to do the right thing. Like a game of tennis, Russia and Ukraine court Trump to avoid being blamed for peace talk failures. Russia doesn't want peace. Russia doesn't want to stop the war. So Russia is trying to make it look like it's Ukraine's fault that the war doesn't stop, and Ukraine, rightfully so, is trying to make it look like Russia is the one who doesn't stop the war. Ukraine desperately still needs the economic partnership and cooperation of the United States, as well as at least the sale of military equipment for them to continue fighting this war. So this was the master plan. Putin had his big day on May 9th, the Victory Day parade. Something like 20 heads of state attended the parade in Moscow. May 10th, European leaders went to Kyiv to steal the headlines, and they gave an ultimatum to the Russians, EU to unveil new sanctions against Russia on May 14th. So what the European leaders said on May 10th is that by Monday, Russia must agree to a 30-day ceasefire, or else crippling sanctions will be applied to Russia. Macron of France was talking to Trump. Trump agreed. Starmer of the UK was talking to Trump. Trump agreed. In theory, Donald Trump and the United States will participate in increasing sanctions on Russia if Russia does not agree to a 30-day ceasefire. This is what Germany was saying. Clock is ticking. Germany warns Russia to accept the ceasefire until midnight last night or face new sanctions. If Moscow does not accept the demand, preparations will be set in motion for fresh sanctions, according to the government spokesperson, Stefan Cornelius. Even China was on board with this. China, after she attended the May 9th Victory Day parade, publicly supported the Europeans' plan that Russia should immediately agree to a 30-day ceasefire to engage in peace talks. So Putin had to respond. This was a lot of political pressure coming from the Europeans, coming from the Chinese. Allegedly, Donald Trump was in support of this plan. So Putin gave a 2 a.m. press conference in which he said, "I'm not going to agree to a ceasefire, but I would like to resume unconditional direct talks with Ukraine to negotiate a peace deal." This is a delay tactic. This is stupid. And of course, Donald Trump fell for it. Trump thwarts EU plans when he calls for direct talks with Russia. Because Putin said he wanted to engage in direct talks with Ukraine in Istanbul, Trump said, "Take the meeting. Go meet with the Russians on Thursday and see if you can somehow magically achieve peace." Zelensky says, "Fine, we'll agree to the meeting in Turkey, but get Putin to agree to a ceasefire." But Putin demands no preconditions. Agreeing to a 30-day ceasefire prior to peace talks is a condition, and Russia is rejecting it. Ukraine says Russia fired 108 drones overnight despite the ceasefire deadline. So the Europeans collectively gave Russia their ultimatum. Putin's response was, "What about peace talks in Turkey?" And Donald Trump took the bait, undermining the Europeans' complete resolve. But I want to believe that Zelensky saw this outcome ahead of time, and he was prepared. Zelensky offers to meet Putin in Turkey personally. Zelensky wants to go to Istanbul to meet face-to-face with Putin to resolve this war. Here's the clip. I'm not going to read the subtitles. Let's play it. And this is what Zelensky says and how he sounds about meeting Putin face-to-face.
Я неодноразово підкреслював це президенту Трампу, вважаю, що Путін не хоче закінчення війни, не хоче припинення вогню, не хоче будь-яких перемовин. Я вже мовчу про те, що він боїться прямих перемовин зі мною.
So that's the trap. Zelensky is deliberately goading Putin, saying that Putin doesn't want to end the war, Putin doesn't want a ceasefire, Putin himself doesn't want to engage in direct negotiations, and Putin is afraid to meet face-to-face with Zelensky. This is like some high school, like alpha male sports rivalry stuff happening, but I actually do think this is effective. I do think this is how Donald Trump thinks and feels, and this is a setup. Zelensky is trying to frame this face-to-face meeting like Putin is going to chicken out because Putin doesn't have any real courage to go to Istanbul to meet Zelensky face-to-face. Here's what Zelensky is saying. Ukraine has always supported diplomacy. I am ready to come to Turkey. Unfortunately, the world still has not received a clear response from Russia to the numerous proposals for a ceasefire. Russian shelling and assaults continue. Moscow has remained silent all day regarding the proposal for a direct meeting. A very strange silence. One way or another, Russia will have to end this war, and the sooner the better. There is no sense in continuing the killing. What's the Kremlin's response? Kremlin reiterates Putin's call for Istanbul talks, but remains silent on possible Zelensky meeting. You can't talk to Russia like this. Moscow pushes back on ceasefire calls. Russia doesn't like being pressured. Russia likes killing people. Russia wants to continue killing as many people as they feel is necessary. So I have to read this. This is Peskov's response to these EU demands and EU threats. And the Russians aren't really taking them serious. Before this warning, we had already heard the warning the day before yesterday, if you remember. They were also voiced in a rather ultimatum way. Such language of ultimatums is unacceptable for Russia. It's not appropriate. One cannot talk to Russia in such a language. As you know, summarizing the results of the festive celebrations in Moscow devoted to May 9th, and numerous meetings and negotiations with our foreign guests, the Russian president issued a statement. In that statement, among other things, he clearly and unequivocally set out our position on the resumption of direct talks in Istanbul without any preconditions. So that's rejecting the ceasefire. The same direct talks that were interrupted by the Ukrainian side in 2022. This approach aimed precisely at finding a real diplomatic solution to the Ukrainian crisis, addressing the root causes of the conflict and establishing lasting peace, has been met with understanding and support from the leaders of many countries, including our partners in the CIS, BRICS, and other countries. In general, we are committed to seriously seeking ways for a long-term peace settlement. No, they're not. China is calling for a 30-day ceasefire. So these are the jokes, these are the memes online. Here are Putin's doubles looking at each other saying, which one of us has to go to Istanbul? Here's an AI-generated pic. To demonstrate strength, Russia sends two Putins to go to Istanbul. Here's the parody account Darth Putin. I have rejected my own offer for direct peace talks with Zelensky. In Putin's press conference, this is what it sounded like, that Putin was willing to engage in direct peace talks with Ukraine. Not to just send some low-level subordinates to go waste some time when they don't have the final decision on anything. If Putin sends Lavrov or any other of his underlings, they can't make decisions. Only the Tsar of Russia, only Putin can make final decisions and negotiate anything. It's one man in Russia that has all the power, all the say to make this stop. According to the Institute for the Study of War, Kremlin portrays Ukraine's surrender terms as a reasonable peace offer to manipulate Western opinion. Yes, once this Russian delegation meets the Ukrainian delegation in Istanbul, The Russians are just going to say the exact same thing they were saying 3 years ago. Putin's words change, but not his demand that Ukraine surrenders. On Thursday, the Russians once again are going to demand Ukraine's full capitulation, the demilitarization of Ukraine, a reduction in the size of their military to less than 80,000. Ukraine has to promise never to join NATO. Zelensky has to resign, and a pro-Russian president must be installed. And Ukraine must surrender the entirety of these 4 regions to get a ceasefire. Not to end the war, just to get a ceasefire. Everything that Russia has failed to take militarily on the battlefield the last 3 years, they just want to be given. For a ceasefire. And I want to remind everyone, the city of Zaporizhia is 700,000 people. The Russians want to be given the entirety of the Zaporizhia administrative borders, so their artillery can then be within striking range of the city of Dnipro, 1 million people. They also want to be given back the north bank of the Dnipro River and the city of Kherson, pre-war population 300,000. They want their artillery to be allowed to be placed within striking range of Mykolaiv, and a short strike if they ever want to take Odessa in the future. So no, Ukraine's not going to agree to this. Even Witkoff, I don't think, supports the city of Zaporizhia being handed over just for a ceasefire. So what is going to happen this week? And Zelensky is going to fly to the capital of Turkey, Ankara. Istanbul is not the capital. And Zelensky is going to meet with Erdogan, putting his hands in the air and saying, "Putin, where are you? Putin, why aren't you here? I'm here to find peace." The talks on Thursday aren't going to do anything. And this is how leading figures in MAGA are responding. I want to play this clip from Ben Shapiro. He is one of the most prominent voices in MAGA. He's a huge Trump supporter. But he's fed up with the Russians. And he thinks it's about time that Donald Trump fully put his support behind Ukraine's cause, because that serves the best interests of the United States. Let me play a little bit of this clip.
Zelensky, who earlier had wanted a truce, a 30-day ceasefire as a condition of the talks, responded immediately. So again, Zelensky is doing the stuff that Trump wants him to do. Let's be clear, who is doing what Trump wants him to do when it comes to Putin Zelensky? The answer is Vladimir Zelensky is doing the stuff Trump wants him to do.
This is a detail that I think people have already forgotten. But initially, Ukraine did not want to offer the Russians a 30-day ceasefire. The United States cut off military aid to Ukraine to force them to offer the Russians a 30-day ceasefire. And now for over 2 months, Putin and the Russians have been ignoring it. For over 2 months, Putin and the Russians have been ignoring Donald Trump's offer of a 30-day ceasefire to then engage in peace talks.
There's no other way to read this. Trump is calling for things and Zelensky is doing them. Trump wants a rare earths minerals deal. Zelensky says, sure. President Trump wants a ceasefire, a 30-day ceasefire. Zelensky says, sure. President Trump wants a 30-day ceasefire out the window so they can negotiate. Zelensky says, sure. And every step of the way, Putin is delaying. Because Putin is basically gambling that at a certain point, President Trump gets bored and walks away. That's the gamble. And it takes 8...
Ben Shapiro is correct. This is what the Russians want. They want Donald Trump to get bored and frustrated, and then just to walk away. Lift all sanctions on Russia, stop supplying weapons to Ukraine, and ignore the situation. Let the Russians kill everything they want, everyone they want to kill, and take all the land they want to take. It's just a land grab. But because Trump said, let's have the meeting on Thursday, Europe waits for Turkey summits to ask Trump for Russia sanctions. So we're going to do it this weekend. It's going to be stupid. Nothing is going to come of it. But maybe by Monday next week, we can try this again, give Russia the ultimatum, agree to a 30-day ceasefire, or the United States will participate in increasing sanctions on the Russians. If there is no real progress in resolving the Russian-Ukrainian conflict this week, the European Union will impose sanctions against Moscow in the energy and financial sectors. This is the German Chancellor's statement. Okay. I mean, waiting a week isn't a big deal at this point. We've already come this far. But Zelensky has to just indulge Trump, to humor him, to give him no way to wiggle out of this. Trump is desperate to find some way to remain friends with Putin and stay on good terms with the Russians, but Russia is not giving him a choice. This is what he was asked. He was asked directly, are you ready to impose sanctions on Russia if Putin doesn't agree to the 30-day ceasefire? And Trump, as usual, gave a stupid answer.
Mr. President, are you ready to impose sanctions on Russia if Putin doesn't agree with the 30-day ceasefire?
I have a feeling they're going to agree. I do. I have a feeling.
And
Trump has a feeling that this time it'll be different. And this does not mirror reality. The Kremlin claims that Ukraine is a reincarnation of Nazi Germany. This is what they've been telling their people for 3 years, that all of the Ukrainians are Nazis who have to be exterminated, every single last one of them. The propaganda shift in Russia, this is the polling as of September of 2024, only 16% of Russians have a favorable opinion of the United States. It briefly spiked with Trump's election, but it's going back down. Russia hates us. Russia hates Ukraine, Russia hates Europe, Russia hates the United States. So Donald Trump eventually is going to have to do the right thing after exhausting every other option. And this is how the Russians speak of us in the West. Here is Solovyev once again on Kremlin State TV. Solovyev and Simonyan criticize Trump and threaten Europe. The entire clip is 6 minutes. I'll link it down below, but I just want to read for you the language they're choosing to use when peace talks start on Thursday, allegedly. This is what the Russians are saying. When I see the French and Germans, when I hear their discussions about Ukraine, about Zelensky, I can't feel anything but deep, justified hatred towards them. For this reason, when French and German journalists are asking me, is it true? Yes, it's true. We will destroy all of you. We will destroy your cities if you get involved in this war. And right now, you're positioning yourselves as participants in this war. Talking about sending peacekeepers, talking about sending monitors or increasing sanctions. This is the Russians' response. We will destroy all of you. Your cities will burn and suffer the way cities of Donbass are suffering. It was the Russians that destroyed Mariupol, a city in the Donbass region, killing tens of thousands of innocent civilians. The cities of Donbass suffer because of Russia, and this is the Russians saying, the rest of Europe is next. We're going to nuke all of your cities and kill hundreds of millions of people if you don't let us win. Just let us win. Let Ukraine die. And I'm not joking, guys. It is very important for everyone in the world that Russia does not win, not just for the sake of Ukraine. We cannot let this ideology, this philosophy, this culture permeate across the Eurasian continent. I'm going to link some videos down below, and this is very disturbing content. I see videos on Twitter all the time of how the Russians discipline their own, how the Russians brutalize civilians, and even for me, this is shocking. So this first video, this is the 15th Motorized Rifle Brigade of Russia, and they bury deserters up to their necks in what's called a tight pit. So this is a video of a Russian man accused of being a deserter, buried up to his neck, and then left to die. If he dies, he's just reported as missing in action. In this clip, these are Russian men who have been put inside some kind of metal pipe or barrel. No food or water, left there for days in the freezing cold. Sometimes these Russian men are put in these pits or pipes until they're willing to surrender their salaries to their commanding officers. This video is pretty horrifying. It's pretty shocking. And it gets worse. In this video, I watched it, and I kind of regret watching it. A Russian commander has thrown two of his subordinates in a pit, and he's filming this, and he's telling them, you have to kill each other, and I'll let one of you out. Using your bare hands, you must kill the other man in the pit. I'm gonna... He bets on it. And then the video plays one of the Russian men strangling the other one to death. These are uniformed soldiers in the Russian military, and this is all caught on camera. This is their culture. This is who the Russians really are. This is how they treat their own. So you can only imagine how they treat foreigners, how they treat non-Russians. I remember this scene from Django Unchained, where the slave master, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, orders two men to fight to the death for his amusement. And this is real. Caught on camera, on the internet for everyone to see. Where is the global reaction? Where is the global outrage that human beings are being treated this way? And it's still ambiguous who are the good guys to some people? I also want to read this post from UA Voyager. After a year and a half of silence, my relative from the temporarily occupied village on the right bank of Kherson region got in touch. She is alive. A kind neighbor gave her the chance to call, hiding a Ukrainian SIM card. Calling from the occupied territory can be life-threatening. She says it's a complete disaster. She's lucky because she's elderly and alone, so the occupiers don't bother her. People are scared, just surviving. She's crying, doesn't believe we'll ever meet again. She says she thinks she's hearing me for the last time. I promise that everything will be fine and that she needs to hold on, but it's hard to believe that myself. It's horrifying to think that Ukrainian civilians now for over 3 years have been surviving. This phone call came from one of the villages in the occupied Kherson region. And these people need to be saved. They all need to be liberated. Russia must be expelled from all of this territory. Let's get to some other headlines. Poland accuses Russia of ordering a major fire in Warsaw last year. And this is a shopping center in the capital city of Warsaw. And Poland is saying they have the evidence that Russian intelligence directed the sabotage and arson of this shopping center. Poland's response is they're shutting down the consulate in Krakow, expelling Russian diplomats, but Russia's never going to stop. Until Putin is dead or in jail, until the Russian military is defeated, they're never going to stop killing people. They're never going to stop sabotaging and stealing and raping and brutalizing people. Because that's all that remains of Russian culture now. There is nothing else. Devotion to the Tsar and glory to the empire. They're never going to stop interfering in other nations' elections as well. This was the first round of voting in Romania, and the pro-Russian candidates got 40% of the votes. So the runoff election between the top two candidates is happening on May 18th. And we got the latest poll. It's a dead heat, 48-48. Will Romania remain a capitalist democracy that wants to have real freedoms and prosperity? Or will they allow a far-right autocrat to corrupt and take control of the government and become subservient to Russia? Romania this week has the risk of becoming the next Belarus or Hungary. We'll find out together. This is good news. Pope Leo talks with Zelensky in his first known call with a foreign leader. The first foreign leader that the new Pope decided to make a phone call to was President Zelensky. I spoke with Pope Leo XIV. It was our first conversation, but already a very warm and truly substantive one. I thanked His Holiness for his support of Ukraine and all of our people. We deeply value his words about the need to achieve a just and lasting peace for our country and the release of prisoners. I invited His Holiness to make a visit to Ukraine. Such a visit would bring real hope to all believers and to all of our people. We agreed to stay in contact and plan an in-person meeting in the near future. The new Pope speaks English, so Zelensky can directly communicate with him. And I do think that the new Pope is going to make a visit to Kyiv probably at some point in the next 3 months. I think the Pope will take the train ride and he'll probably tell the Russians ahead of time when he'll be there so the Russians don't bomb the capital city again. But this is important, and I really like the new Pope. He's doing the correct thing. Final clip I have for you is 2 Ukrainian defenders that found a stray dog wrapped up in some barbed wire, and they saved the dog's life.
Не, нормально, нормально, нормально. Я уже с ней воевал. Так, тихо, да, давай его. Я туда помогал себе.
Друг человека, да? А я думаю, ти палкою і тренуєш.
Так, блядь, вона мене кусала перше время. Я ж поки до неї собачився, да? Чи худе, оце больне, да? Чи молодець. Все, зашибись. Спасибо.
That's all for this update video. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. If you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Best way to support the channel. Comments and questions, let me know down below. I love hearing from you guys. Till the next video, keep defending the truth, keep defending democracy.
Cost environment. And as you can see, currently at the moment, the labour cost in China is around $6.50 to $8 per hour. And as it stands right now, around 30% of all manufacturing imports into the USA are made in China. And they're made up mostly of electronics, machinery, textiles, and toys. Now, if we compare that $6.50 to $8 per hour to the rest of the countries on this list, you can see that it's actually a lot cheaper in many of the other countries. In Mexico, where the USA derives 14% of its manufacturing imports, mostly automotive, electronics, and appliances, the average labour cost is less than $4 per hour. So that's roughly half of what it is in China right now. In Vietnam, where the US sources around 10% of its manufactured products, mostly apparel, footwear, and electronics, labour costs are around $3 per hour. So that's significantly cheaper than it is in China. And in India, average labour costs can be as low as $1.50 to $3 per hour. Now, currently, the USA is sourcing around 5% of its manufactured imports, and that's textiles, pharmaceuticals, and automotive parts. However, there is a big shift going on right now. And if we look at the rest of the countries on this list, Bangladesh, which provides around 3% of US imports, they provide a lot of socks into the USA, but a lot of other textiles and garments. Average labour costs can be as low as $1 per hour. Now, when you compare that to the USA, and I've talked about this a lot in recent videos, where Donald Trump wants to move all of the business back into the USA, it is going to be very difficult to find anybody in the US who's prepared to work for $1 per hour. In fact, it probably isn't even legal. I'm sure the labour laws would prevent you from paying somebody $1 per hour. Indonesia, average prices are around $1.50 to $2.50. Thailand, you're looking at paying people between $2.50 and $4. The Philippines, between $2 and $3. Pakistan, between $1 and $1.50 per hour. And that point is well made, I think, in terms of trying to find somebody in the US to replace those jobs that are in Pakistan. Obviously, you could automate a lot of things so that you wouldn't have to have many people in the factories, but there's going to be a high return on capital if you're making everything automated. And in Cambodia, it's between $1 and $1.50. And the point really of showing this chart is just to highlight the fact that China, relative to the rest of the world, is no longer the low-cost alternative. It's actually become more expensive from a people perspective to pay people in China than it is in all of these other countries. And that's one of the reasons why US companies and other international businesses are now relocating their manufacturing out of China to somewhere else. If you're running a business, the cost of labor isn't the only factor that you need to weigh up. You need to make sure that the people who are doing the job are skilled enough to be able to do it to the quality that you're looking for. So there's no point paying people a very low rate and then producing low quality product. That's just going to put you back to square one because you're going to have to scrap all of that product and start again. And over the last 40 or 50 years, China has become very skilled in low cost labor. However, the rest of the world is now catching up. This table compares the 10 countries that we've just looked at in terms of the cost of labour and looks at their skilled rating. Now, China, as I said, is highly skilled, so it can produce things on a huge volume using lots of people. So we've given it a 3-star rating. And you've got a strong base of engineers, advanced manufacturing talent, and also lots of robotics that are now being used in Chinese factories. Second on this list is India, which we've given 2 stars to because it's got an excellence in IT and engineering and is growing its technical education sector. So India is coming up on the rails. It is fast catching up to China in terms of its skilled workforce. So we saw that it's a lot cheaper to use people in India, and those people are becoming more and more skilled. Mexico has a similar ranking to India because it's skilled in the automotive sector, electronics, and aerospace industries. So it's specialized in those different areas. And that's why a lot of US businesses are now using Mexican companies and Mexican manufacturing and Mexican people because they're good at doing what you need them to do. Thailand and the Philippines also rank equally with Mexico and India because they've got skills in electronics, automotive, and medical manufacturing and are also highly educated. Now, the other countries on this list we've given 1 star to: Vietnam, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Cambodia. However, for certain things, for certain goods and products, you don't need to have a highly skilled workforce. So you can see here that these countries are good at producing garments and footwear and apparel. So they can be outsourced. All of those things can be outsourced without having a highly skilled workforce. And then the other items, you need to develop that skill. You need to build up all of those potential people to be able to do things that you want them to do. So what the point of this chart is really is to show that whilst China still ranks at the top, it does have the most skilled workforce and the best techniques. These other countries are rapidly catching up. And obviously, the best way to learn, the best way to develop your skills is to be given more business, to take on more people, to actually train them up. And over time, you'll also become skilled and maybe the price will go up. But at the moment, there is a large cost differential between all these countries and China. And the difference in terms of the skill base is narrowing. Now, having a low cost and skilled workforce isn't the only thing that you need in terms of setting up your manufacturing facility overseas. You also need to make sure that the product can be moved safely and on time to the ports and then exported. So you need good infrastructure, either good roads or good rail network or facilities that are located close to the ports. And this chart compares China to the other 9 countries that we've been looking at. And I've given China 3 stars here because it's got world-class highways, rails, ports, and mega industrial zones. So it's been set up to basically be a manufacturing country. That's what it's been designed to do. So it does have good networks. But also you can see here that Mexico, India, Indonesia, and Thailand also have good infrastructure. So Mexico has a strong US border infrastructure, industrial cities, and decent roads. So it's been following the same sort of model that China has built itself upon. It's been building these large factories and making sure that they've got good infrastructure to be able to move all of that product swiftly and efficiently. India is following a similar pattern, so it's setting up key hubs, but it still does have some uneven transport and utilities. So it isn't quite there yet in terms of being able to compete like for like with China. But as I said, it is a lot cheaper and it's growing its potential. So I'm sure over the next 5 to 10 years, India will catch up to China. Indonesia also has decent infrastructure in Java. However, the rest of the country is still quite remote and isn't as developed. So it's got a big hub at the moment in Java, but it needs really to start developing the rest of its infrastructure if it's going to compete like for like with countries like China and India. And Indonesia has a huge population. It's one of the most populous countries in the world. Thailand had solid roads, highways, airports, and transport systems, but again isn't quite on the same level as China or even Mexico at the moment. And then we've got the other countries, Vietnam, Bangladesh, the Philippines, Pakistan, and Cambodia, where we've got a developing situation. So there are some good roads and some decent rail networks. However, it's not quite as comprehensive as it is in the other countries. But the point of highlighting this is just to show the fact that it's not just the cost of labour and whether or not the people are skilled enough to be able to produce things. You need to make sure that you can actually move all of the product safely, get it to the port, and then get it out of the country. So once you've got your product to port, you need to make sure that that port is large enough to be able to cope with the volume of products that are moving through it, both inward and outward cargoes, and also that it's got the logistics and the capacity to be able to monitor exactly where everything is, to put it onto the right ships, to make sure that those ships are going to the right destination. So there's a lot involved in terms of what's going on at the ports. And this chart compares the 9 countries that we've just talked about against China. And as you can see, China once again ranks right at the top of this list. It's home to 7 of the world's 10 busiest container ports. Not surprisingly, because it's the manufacturing base for most of the world. So that's where most of these containers are actually originating from. That's where they're being filled up and then sent on to other countries. And it's also got world-class logistics and an efficient customs system. So it can process and move all of these goods in and out of the port really quickly. So you don't want weeks and weeks of hold up and paperwork and people not knowing where any of the cargo is or losing containers. You don't want any of that if you're on a very tight schedule in terms of getting that ship to where it's going to, because from China a lot of these ports will wait 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks for those ships to actually arrive. So you can't have a hold up at the customs system, which is then causing major problems and then will have a knock-on impact. And if we look at the other countries on this list, you can see that I've given Mexico, Thailand, India, and Indonesia 2 stars. So they're doing well in terms of their ports. They're not at the same level as China, but quite frankly, not many countries in the world are. And you can see that all of these countries have developed their ports over the past 20 years or so. And then we've got Vietnam, the Philippines, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Cambodia at the bottom, where they're still developing their capacity. They're still building out their ports. They may have 1 or 2 ports, but they don't have huge capacity to be able to take on the sort of volume of products that China is processing on a daily basis. But everybody's moving in the right direction. And you can see that Mexico, Thailand, India, and Indonesia are not far off being able to compete with China. Historically, one of the other reasons why companies went to China was because there were incentives on offer. So the Chinese authorities would offer grants or subsidies or tax-free zones or special development zones in order to encourage companies to go over and build their facilities. However, that's now happening with all of these other countries. And you can see from this table that I've just listed out some of the programs that are being offered. So you can see Mexico has the IMEX program, which is a duty-free import and export system. It also offers tax breaks and special economic zones near the border for the USA and support specifically for the automotive and aerospace industries. Vietnam provides tax exemptions for up to 4 years, reduced corporate tax of between 10 and 15%, and land lease reductions, and also has special economic zones. And India is now offering production-linked incentive schemes, tax cuts for manufacturing, also has special economic zones, and will do fast-track approvals. And you can see that the rest of the countries on this list are also offering similar sorts of incentives. So we've got more of a level playing field now in terms of most countries know that they need to encourage these companies to come in and set up their facilities, because once they've done that, they've got that business, they've got that employment for a long period of time. You're not going to countries like Vietnam and setting up a huge facility and then deciding within a couple of weeks that you're going to move on somewhere else. This is a long-term capital incentive that once you've set it up, you're going to have that facility there for the foreseeable future. So countries have realized that they need to offer these sort of things. And interestingly, there's been a backlash against China over the past couple of years, particularly when we're talking about electric vehicles. We've seen the USA and the European Union introduce tariffs because they believe that the Chinese authorities have actually been subsidizing those industries too heavily to enable them to be able to sell their products at much cheaper prices around the rest of the world. So to level that off, we've now seen these tariffs being introduced. The USA's introduced a tariff of 100% on electric vehicles being imported from China. And that was before the 145% that Donald Trump introduced. So in terms of which companies are actually relocating out of China and where are they going, this table shows an example of some of the companies who've moved their manufacturing over recent years or have announced that they're going to. And as you can see at the top of this list, we've got Apple, who's moved from China to Vietnam and India. It's been diversifying its supply chain and now has 26 suppliers operating 28 factories in Vietnam. And the company's planning to increase its investments into Vietnam further. That was before Donald Trump announced that he was imposing a 90% tariff on all imports from Vietnam. There may be an exemption with regards to Apple and electronics. It's all a bit of a grey area at the moment. And also, I'm sure that Vietnam will negotiate that tariff down to a more acceptable level. So Apple initially saw its share price crashing when it was announced that that 90% tariff was being introduced. However, it has come back because I don't think realistically it's going to be 90%. Dell have moved their facilities from China to Mexico and Vietnam, and they're also now looking to potentially expand that. HP have moved to Mexico and Southeast Asia. Nike have moved their facilities to Vietnam. Foxconn have moved to India and Vietnam. Ericsson to India. Flex Steel to Vietnam and Mexico. So what we're seeing here is lots of US and international businesses moving their manufacturing bases out of China to other low labor cost countries for the reasons that we've discussed. And politically, I think there will probably be more of this because as we see the tension rising between the USA and China, there is a very real possibility that the tariffs could be increased at any time. So if you're a company and you're sourcing lots of your materials directly from China at the moment, the last thing that you want is to see a huge increase in costs just because of some political decision. So it probably makes sense from a business perspective to diversify where your manufacturing is located. And as we've talked about in today's video, there are now a lot of other countries that offer the same sort of benefits as China. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because there's been a lot of discussion about what's happening between the USA and China over the course of the last couple of months since Donald Trump took over as the president. And what we've seen is a trade war erupting. We've got tariffs as it stands at the moment. When I made this video, you never know, things can change within minutes or hours with Donald Trump. But at the time of making this video, the 145% tariff was still officially in place. There is some discussion about the two parties coming together and agreeing something lower, but as it stands, it is at that level. And that would absolutely kill your business if it does go through. If Apple was sourcing all of its outsourced manufacturing from China and the price of that increased by 145%, that would push the price of an iPhone above $3,000, which would obviously completely destroy Apple's business model and it would destroy all of its sales. So I don't think as a business owner you can run that risk. And what we've got here is a situation where companies are now looking at alternative options. Now, China 30 or 40 years ago was probably the no-brainer place to go because it was first to market. It was a low labour cost country that suddenly developed all of its infrastructure and was able to handle huge volumes of production at very low cost. And so that made it really attractive if you were a company that wanted to outsource your manufacturing because you could do it for a very low value. However, what we've seen over the course of the last 7 or 8 years, particularly in the USA, is that tariffs have started to be introduced on lots of imports from China because the US authorities believe that the Chinese authorities have been subsidizing a lot of the companies in China, and also because of the tension in terms of the trade deficit between the US and China. The US authorities have said they need to level the playing field. So, from a company perspective, there are now real risks associated to having your manufacturing in China. And as a result of that, we've started to see companies moving away from China. They've decided to go to other low labour cost economies. And what we've seen over the past 10 to 15 years is that countries such as Mexico and India and the Philippines and Thailand have been developing their infrastructure, they've been improving their ports, they've been improving their logistics and improving their skill base, so their people are now better at doing things. And that means that they're now competing with China on a like for like basis. And from a political point of view, there's less tension with most of those countries. Obviously, there's an issue at the moment between the USA and Mexico because of the fentanyl drug problem that Donald Trump has identified. He believes that a lot of that drug is moving into the USA through the Mexico border, and so he's applied this 25% tariff. But whether or not that remains in place, nobody really knows. But what this tells us is that over the last 10 years, we have seen US and other international companies starting to decide that they no longer want to source their manufacturing from China. And as it stands right now, we're seeing an acceleration in companies moving away from China to other low labour cost economies. And of course, the impact of all of this on the Chinese economy is going to be damaging, because China has been benefiting from all of that employment, all of that investment over the last 30 or 40 years. And as that investment and employment starts to move to other countries, then China will see a reduction in its employment. It will see less people being paid, higher wages by overseas companies. And so this is going to prove a real challenge for the Chinese authorities at a time when the Chinese economy is already struggling. We've talked a lot about the property situation. The property market is completely shot at the moment. It's come right down. Lots of property development companies have become bankrupt and illiquid and disappeared, and the state have been nationalising lots of others. People have lost confidence in the property sector. So manufacturing is a really important part of China's GDP. It accounted for 40% of GDP in the first quarter of 2025. And if we continue to see overseas companies deciding that they're moving out of China to other countries, that's going to reduce the amount of manufacturing in China. It'll reduce the profitability of that sector, and therefore will drag down GDP. So represents yet another challenge for China in terms of trying to achieve its 5% growth target for 2025. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then
Hello my friends and welcome, my name is Dennis and this is the latest update from Ukraine. First of all, we have political news around Ukraine, the most important news I would say for a very long time. We're speaking about the potential meeting between President Zelensky and Vladimir Putin, a Russian dictator.
I recently read that scientists have generated electricity from rain, and that this method could produce up to 100 watts per square meter. That'd be only a factor of 4 or so less than solar panels. I've seen headlines saying that it could one day overhaul our power grid. Big if true. Let's have a look. Many thanks to all our supporters, especially our patrons in Tier 4 and higher. This channel would not be possible without your help. If you enjoy my videos, please consider supporting me on Patreon or joining this channel right here on YouTube. Now about how to make electricity from rain. This research comes from a group at the National University of Singapore. They generate electricity by letting water flow through tiny plastic tubes. That's surprising because to generate electricity you need to move charges. And normally the water at the wall of the tube will build up polarization, alright? but the charges would just stick there, so no moving charges, no electricity. In the new experiment now, the scientists solved this problem by looking at the flow of water interrupted by air, like you might have in rainfall. Because that doesn't allow the charges to get stuck, they need to move along with the water drops as they trickle down through the tube. And from that, one can create electricity. It's really clever and basically a way to convert gravitational energy into electric energy. In their experiments, they used a tube of approximately 30 centimeters in length and 2 millimeters in diameter, like a straw really, and fed it with a mix of water and air at 80 milliliters per minute. This generated a power of 0.4 milliwatt. According to the press release, they used 4 of these tubes to power 12 small LEDs, so that's a clear demonstration that it indeed works. They calculate that the conversion from gravitational potential energy to electricity has 10% efficiency. How do they get their estimate of 100 watts per square meter? You just have to ask how many of these tubes you could fit next to each other vertically. They're about 2 millimeters in diameter, and leaving aside details of the packing, you can estimate that roughly 250,000 will fit into a square meter. Multiply with a 0.4 milliwatt per tube, and you get roughly 100 watts per square meter. Yes. But first, it's worth mentioning that the LEDs which they talk about are these little indicator lights that you can find on a circuit board, not your normal household LEDs for room lighting, which need a few watts. But much more important is the question of how much rain would you need for those 100 watts per square meter. They don't calculate this in the paper, but I did. That'd be 250,000 tubes per square meter, so 250,000 times those 80 milliliters per minute that they used. That's about 20,000 liter per square meter per minute. Rainfall is typically quoted in millimeters per hour, and heavy rain is something like a centimeter per hour. The rain you'd need for the 100 watts per square meter, in contrast, is something like a kilometer per hour. If it ever rained that much on your roof, you'd have bigger worries than your electricity bill. Another way to look at it is that if you collected rain per square meter and channeled it into those tubes, you could only run a few of those per square meter. So I think at best you generate a few milliwatts per square meter with this idea. We could, and indeed I think we should, ask, what's the point? Why not just collect the rainwater and run a turbine with it? This indeed exists for, say, rain pipes, and if you have a big roof and heavy rain, that can produce a few hundred watts. The efficiency of these turbines is usually in the range of 50 to 80% or so, so much higher than what those people propose. So this idea definitely is not going to overhaul the power grid. But that isn't to say that the idea is useless. The benefit of this idea is that you don't need a turbine. You need no moving parts and no collector. This could be useful, for example, if you have a situation with a lot of water condensation going on, maybe in a factory. You could generate electricity from that trickling water. It's also more easily portable, I'd imagine, so you could maybe use it for some measurement devices or such. In summary, it's a really clever idea, and there's good evidence that it indeed works. But I'm afraid it's not going to revolutionize energy production. So keep on dusting the solar panels. Problems. I'm sure you have a few, but problem solving is a skill that you can.
I used to upgrade my PC every 4 years or so, and every time I upgraded, the new one was about twice as fast as the old one when I tested it. But now I'm wondering, how much faster have PCs gotten at executing really old-style workloads over the years? And I'm talking old-fashioned C code, single-threaded, not even using floating point. And I have 8 old PCs of various ages, including this one here, which was my daily driver till 2012, and it still runs Windows XP. And I just got a new one, which is my fastest yet. This one's provided by Geekom, who are sponsoring this video. More on that later. And back in 2002, I wrote a C program to find all possible arrangements of the 12 pentomino pieces in a 6x10 grid like this, and I figured that would be a really good benchmark. And if I only counted the solutions found instead of printing them out, I was able to get that down to 90 seconds on my 500 MHz Celeron at the time. But I no longer have any computers that old, so I'm not going to go that far back with my tests. And to make this properly old school, I'm compiling my code on Windows XP with a Microsoft C compiler from 1998. And my old XP box could run that in just over 7 seconds. My present daily driver can run it in half of that time, but my newest computer, this one, actually takes longest, almost as long as the old XP box. So now it starts to get interesting. Why so little change over more than a decade, and why is my newest computer slower? The thing is, my old school program actually uses unaligned access of 32-bit words to process 4 bytes at a time, and the Intel i9 in this newest PC doesn't like that so much. And that unaligned access optimization is definitely an old school trick. But that same year in 2002, I also wrote a 3D pentomino solver, and that one has a lot more pieces because it also includes the non-flat pentominoes. And that program doesn't use that unaligned trick, so it's perhaps a more fair benchmark. And for that one, I'm just timing how long it takes to find the first solution because there's so many more solutions, and we can see the time goes down and then it goes up. Now, to be fair to Geekom, who provided this computer, I'm compiling 23-year-old code with a 27-year-old compiler on a 17-year-old PC. But it's nicer if the bars get longer as the speed gets higher, so this is scaled 1 over time relative to my 2010 Core i5 PC. So that one there is a 1, and my current daily driver is about 1.5 times faster than that, and the Core i7 is actually slower. Now, both of my pentomino solvers actually implement this sort of heuristic, which is try this piece, try that piece, try the other piece. So they don't really go in a straight line, lots of branching in unpredictable ways, but newer processors with their long pipelines really perform well if the code sort of goes in a straight line predictably. So this benchmark doesn't favor newer computers. To run the clock much faster on newer processors, they do much less work in one clock cycle, and that means breaking the instructions into phases that are very, very small, so a new processor will have at least 10 instructions on the go at any one time, but if it needs to change the code path, all that stuff needs to be discarded and restarted. So newer processors do a really good job of predicting which way a branch is going to go so that it doesn't have to discard stuff. And I thought about this problem back in 2005, so I implemented a bitwise CRC algorithm, and depending on what bit gets shifted out, it goes one branch or another. So that causes unpredictable branches because that's pretty random what comes out. I also implemented this same algorithm but using an expression instead of an if statement. And back then on my Pentium 4, the branchless version, which is actually more complicated, ran twice as fast. So I thought, hey, that'd be an interesting thing to test too. But a much more sensible way of calculating that CRC is with a table-based approach, so I'm testing that too. And running that on a lot of data, here's my times. Green is table-based, the fastest of course. Next is the non-branching version, and the slowest is the branching version across all my computers. And then scaling all those numbers relative to my 2010 i5, at least now the bars are the same height, and we see the performance goes up, but we haven't even doubled in 13 years. And I know that was actually 15 years ago, not 13 years ago, but I'm going by processor release date, and the i9 in my new PC was actually released in 2023. And putting all 5 tests together, scaled to the 2010 i5, we see the new PC is winning, just not with the pentominoes. So I decided to take a 24-year leap forward in compiler technology, so now using the Microsoft Visual Studio compiler from 2022. And here's my execution times, and they definitely go down, and the new PC is now definitely winning. And here's the relative speed up using a new compiler versus the old compiler, and we can see the if-based CRC, that's the bars in orange, have gotten almost 5 times faster with 2 of these computers, and about 4 times faster with the newest computer. And the reason my if-else based CRC code is so much faster with a newer compiler is because in 1995, Intel introduced a conditional move instruction for the Pentium Pro, but my compiler from 1998 couldn't use that yet because most of the computers out there at the time were older. So the new compiler now doesn't need to worry about whether that code is going to run on a Pentium 1 or 486 or even 386, so it can use that instruction and with that avoid the conditional branch, which doesn't screw up the pipeline and makes execution that much faster. But my goal was to screw up the pipeline, and I added this one line here to count how many times I was not shifting in the polynomial. And that got Visual Studio to use the branch again. And I call that one CRC if count, and it's the bars in red, and it basically takes about twice as much time as without that count. And looking at relative speed up again, new compiler versus old compiler, the bars in red are not out of line, not like the bars in orange. And again, scaling the performance relative to my 2010 i5, the 2023 i9 is now more than double the performance. And now relative to the old code with the old compiler on the 2010 PCs, the performance increase is better. So for instance, my pentomino solver is now almost 4 times faster. Now that's running on the performance cores of the i9, but the i9, like a lot of new processors, has 2 types of cores: performance cores and much more efficient efficiency cores. But the efficiency cores also run slower. And so I added the efficiency cores next to the performance cores on this chart, and you can see they're less than half as fast, and we have to go back to my 2010 i5 to get about the same performance. But these slower efficiency cores are nice too, because it means this thing can run more efficiently when it's not super busy. So looking at my power meter, right now that PC is drawing 5 watts. And that means it stays nice and cool. Most of the time its cooling fan isn't even running, and that cooling fan is actually quite quiet, quieter than this one is when it's idling. And I really like a quiet PC, so this will be my new daily driver, especially because it outperforms my bigger PC right behind the monitor. And popping the lid off of this one, I can tell there's a centrifugal fan in there, sort of like this one, and it blows air out through some cooling fins on the back. Sort of like laptop computer fans these days, except this one is bigger. I was afraid that it might use some tiny little fans like this one, because those things